Okay, next up, uh, we have my presentation on scratch building. We'll have the closing of the show and then the caboose, which will, so stick around for the caboose. It's another great video featuring a HO scale, a mature operating layout in the Pittsburgh area. Um, Phil took that video when this past summer at the Pittsburgh narrow gauge convention. So let me jump into my presentation. Everybody see that? Okay, so I'm going to show, I don't know if these, hmm, interesting. Hold on one moment. I'm not supposed to have technical difficulties. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this is scratch building on the ON30 Rustic Buff and Old Gothic. This is the Turtle Creek Depot. This is a nice little depot that I made for a town I'm working on. I think everybody that's watched the show the past couple years is aware of my shanty town. Well, this is the adjacent town, Turtle Creek, named after a town in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, that I used to live near. That is the finished depot, all scratch built. And I'm going to show you how I made that this evening. These were the materials. Little sensitive mouse. I used Mount Albert basswood sheets for the clapboard. I used inexpensive acrylic paint to paint the outside of the structure. And then I used these Hunterline washes to weather it. And then one of my little tricks of the trade is this scratch brush that I got at Micromark. The roofing is actual cedar shakes from Evergreen Hill Designs. I believe they're still in business, cedar shingles. So I always start with a piece of plywood, and I don't really have a plan other than in my head. So the first thing I do is just basically try to maintain a 1/2 inch perimeter around the model, around the piece of plywood, and I build within that square. And I painted the perimeter black and the inside gray, and then I sketch in what I envision this thing's going to look like. Next up, I took that clapboard siding from Mount Albert, and on the reverse side, I sketched in my depot with pencil. And then because I knew I was going to do a video, I went back over it with ink. And then I cut out the windows and doors. If you'll notice, it's still one sheet. I haven't separated the 3 walls in this case. And then I began the construction. Now, interesting enough, when you do scratch building or you're building these structures, you don't have to get too precise with the corners, because just like in real construction, trim covers up these corners. So they go away. I always use 1/4 inch material to brace my models. You'll never see any warpage in anything I build. Perhaps I do a little overkill, but it doesn't really cost you that much in money or time to do it. So I just brace them very extensively. And you're not going to see that gap if you're wondering why I left a gap there. There's a roof line that covers that. So now one of the things I do is this has a vertical clapboard type siding on the extension of the depot. That's to present the illusion that the main structure existed with clapboard with regular siding, and then they added this extension on. Just adds a little variety to the model. And again, it's extensively braced. I use super glue on this construction. I always paint the inside of my structures with a inexpensive craft flat black. These craft flat black paints are the flattest paints and most inexpensive paints I've ever come across. The outside is also painted with a craft yellow paint. And at this point in the model, I would say that that's what I would call obnoxious yellow. And it'll get toned down, as you'll see. So you can see there's room for a foundation around the perimeter of the main building. Everything has been painted with the hard yellow. It's another view. That's sort of a leap here, but what I do is I take that scratch brush that I showed you in the very beginning and I scratch all the surfaces. Then I take the Hunter line washes, these alcohol washes, and I paint the entire structure with a couple colors of these, the Hunter line alcohol washes. Then I take a white acrylic dry brush. So I'll put a little paint in my brush. I'll paint a paper towel, knocks most of the paint off. And then in a downward motion, I'll put a white dry wash on the outside of the building. If I'm going to use the Hunter line washes on top of this, I'll spray the entire building with a sealant, like a dull coat. Though you do have to be careful that alcohol sometimes dissolves dull coat, but typically not. So if you're going to do multiple layers of paint or washes, I frequently dull coat in between so we don't muddy the colors, as we say, artists say, because the acrylic, if you put a white acrylic over yellow acrylic, you're going to get a cream yellow. So you need to typically seal in between coats. And then the green is just for an accent. That's also an inexpensive acrylic there. It's a very easy technique, a very simple technique, and you almost can't fail. And that's a far cry from the obnoxious yellow that this thing started out as. And here we're beginning to trim it out. I used a Minwax stain in this case, just a dark stain. I don't remember the specific color, but I pre-stained all the wood. And then these are 1x4s and 1x6s on the outs, look like 1x4s on the trim of the building, and then 2x6s, or I'm sorry, 1x6s for the platform. That'll all get toned down too. And those are Grant Line windows and doors. And that's a Victorian window on the right. And now I've begun putting the roof on. Likens to airplane construction there on the left extension. That's just, at the time I had a sheet of balsa wood. I wanted to burn out what balsa wood I have. I normally construct in basswood. That roof looks like it's 1/16 inch plywood. So I've built two platforms, and see that brick paper? I went online, Googled brick, found one that I liked, printed it out, cut it out with an X-Acto, and glued it on there with Elmer's white glue. The windows and trim around the door, those are all painted with the Tamaya chocolate brown. And I put some lines on the roof so I could put my those are 2x8s supporting the roof. Those are just little sticks that they don't go all the way through the roof, just on the outside there. So the building's just coming along, all four sides. Now I'm using, that's basswood there. We're getting close to finishing here, starting to be a nice look. See all those corners? See the trim? Those are very fine 1x4s, 1x6s. The horizontal trim are 1x4s. The vertical trim is 1x6s. So we've covered up the rather crude fit of those two sides. One thing I like to do when I do my siding there is match the horizontal siding. So if you notice the front on the left part of the photo and then the right on the side, you see how the boards are more or less equal, they're not offset. That's a critical, if you don't have that, if you don't watch for that, then your siding, one side of your siding's higher than the other, it doesn't look realistic. And there's a pullback to see what I'm talking about. Now I've put on the cedar shingles, start in the bottom and work up. I just use Elmer's glue. There's the finished model. See, with pan pastels, I've knocked back that Minwax platform, the heavy dark brown stain has been knocked back to match the weathering of the actual depot itself. I left the cedar shingles. I didn't stain those, but I did go back with pan pastels, white and gray, and showed an aging there. It has a uniform weathering about it. Nothing is fresh about any of the paint on this model. And put a couple details on there to accent the model. Here's the side. It's a nice little attractive model. The nice thing about scratch building is, to my knowledge, there isn't such a thing as a little kit like this. So if you like little depots, you got to make one yourself. It's really not that difficult. If you use these commercial sidings from Mount Albert or Larkspur, and there's others, and dimensional wood, the advantage to scratch building is you get exactly what you want. The structures fit specific site, and the costs. I mean, I'll bet you I don't have $20 in this model, and a kit, if there was one, would be $150 at least. The signs are just simply Googled, and my little joke, I always put a no dumping sign, then I always have garbage there. Just my little private joke on my layout.
Tom,
Yeah,
what did you use to knock back your coloring on the decking?
the pan pastels.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the finished model. And the model has been placed on the layout now. That's Turtle Creek. That's on the actual layout. And the advantage to building on plywood is in the unlikely event that I move again, the last rustic buff and old Gothic railroad was 15 years in the making and one afternoon to take out, principally because all of the structures that I had were on these plywood bases. And literally, you go in with an X-Acto knife, trace the perimeter where it meets the layout, and pop the structure out. But it's a nice little depot, and scratch building, it's one of a kind. Any questions?
Tom, what did you use for window shades?
Again, I went to Google and I looked up just window shades, actual ones, and I bring them into PowerPoint, downsize them, print them out, cut them out with an X-Acto, and typically Elmer glue them to the back of the acetate.
Tom, when you're knocking down the color with your pan pastels, what do you use to apply them, especially in the corners? Do you use the little makeup sponges or things, or do you use a brush?
I use paintbrushes. I don't, I do
Okay.
makeup brushes, those foam things. I never use them. I imagine they work, but I just use a paintbrush.
They work, but they don't get in corners like a brush does.
Yeah. And the advantage of pan pastels over regular chalk is I seal all my buildings when they're all done with dull coat. If you spray dull coat on a chalk weathering, the chalk disappears. But the pan pastels hold up to dull coat.